I'm Dan Albers, and welcome to This Week in Anderson with Dingo and a coach. I am Dingo, and that is the coach, Steve Ellis. And Steve, I'll tell you what, I'm super, super excited to have Keith O'Brien. He grew up in, the area here in the greater Cincinnati area, graduated from Nicholas High School, New York Times best-selling author, of Paradise Falls, Fly Girls, Outside Shot. But, the one that we're going to get into a lot here today is his book that's coming out here, The Charlie Hustle, The Rise of Pete Rose, comes out this week, and I can't wait to get into the stories about Pete Rose and how he came about writing this. So I'm excited to get with Keith, and I know you are too.
Well, obviously, look behind me. I mean, I got the whole Pete Rose wall here, but yeah, I'm interested to hear Keith's side of it, and I'm sure it's gonna be a great book. I can't wait to get it. But I mean, obviously, we're talking about Pete Rose. There's all kinds of sides to Pete Rose, and so he probably knows a lot more than we do at this point. I can't wait to get the book.
Yeah. So as we said, joining us is Keith O'Brien. Hey, thanks for joining us. I know that you're super busy with this big week coming up for you, and it's amazing opening day, everything that's coming up, and so thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dan and Steve. It's my pleasure to talk to two guys from Anderson Township.
Right.
So let's just kind of take it back to the beginning for everybody real quick. That you did, like we said, you attended Nicholas High School. Just talk a little bit quickly about attending Nicholas High School and what that was like growing up for you.
Well, actually, sorry, Dan, I went to St. X, actually.
St. X, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I grew up in Anderson Township my whole childhood, and I went to St. Xavier High School, graduated from there in 1991. And so, you could sort of piece it together from there. I'm too young to remember the Big Red Machine years. I was alive, but I don't remember them. But of course, I'm in my love for baseball, adolescent love for baseball. When Pete returns in 1984, of course I remember exactly where I was the night he set the all-time hit record. Yeah. And I also remember everything else that comes after that, the scandal and the gambling and the lies and how that sort of hurt lots of people and really sort of I think hurt Cincinnati at that time too.
Yeah. I apologize that for St. X. I don't know, for some reason I thought with Jimmy Jimmy Serger kind of helped us out. I apologize for that.
That's okay.
Thinking it was kind of the same thing, but growing up there and so like you said, it was we were a little too little for that too. I mean, I do distinctly remember the 75, 76, but being a little bit more remember of, unfortunately, Pete at 89 when all the the scandal went down. So it was pretty crazy, but but again, we really appreciate joining us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and so in my book Charlie Hustle, what I guess I approached it for two reasons. I on the one first reason is I feel like this isn't a baseball story. It's a human story. And it's a human story that just happened to happen, in and around a baseball field. And so, that was my approach. I wanted to get as much access as I could to Pete Rose and his inner circle. I did manage to do that. The book is the first book that Pete has ever granted interviews for when he did not have control over the final product, which he did not, which may explain why that after 27 hours of recorded interviews with Pete, he did stop calling me back, and he does not return my calls these days. But I wanted that access. I wanted to tell that human story, and I wanted to tell it now, guys, because the whole world has changed in the 35 years that Pete Rose has been banished, and it's really many of those changes have happened in the past 6 years since the sweeping legalization of sports gambling across America. I mean, you all know, right there in Ohio, you can place bets down at the casino downtown. You can do it on your phone right now from your couch. And of course, the rule that Pete violated in 1989, or that he violated for much of the 1980s, based on my reporting, that rule still stands. Rule 21D clearly states that if you're a player or a manager, you cannot wager on your own games. So were that to happen today, this player would still face permanent ineligibility, as Pete did. However, there is some real cosmic irony here to all the changes that have taken place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw um, a film clip or whatever from Marv Albert, and he was doing a story back in '89, and he was just saying, not only the Pete scandal, but there was other things that were going on in spring training for baseball that were other scandals, not as big as Pete's, but just baseball was in trouble at the time, and there were fights with other teams, and then you fast forward to the whole steroids coming into baseball, and it just brings a whole different dynamic about it. But the one thing I want to ask Keith is when you got, like, after St. X, where did life take you to get to a point to have this passion to write such a deep subject around Cincinnati, especially about Pete?
Yeah, so I graduated from St. X, and I was fortunate to go to college. I went to Northwestern University up in Chicago. I was actually a history major there, but it was there that I really began to write. I did work at the student newspaper, and after graduation, began to explore a career in journalism, and I've been very fortunate in the past 15 years or so to be able to write a number of different books. But this one is while it's narrative nonfiction history, which is what I like to do, written in the way your viewers and listeners would expect. This is written in the third person voice. It is a nonfiction narrative. That said, I mean, because I grew up there and because I remember so many things, I mean, it is, in some ways a very personal book, and really, a postcard, to the past and to the town where I grew up, I think.
Yeah.
So
It's go ahead, Danny.
I was just going to say, so obviously that, I was going to ask, one of the questions I was going to ask is about, being inspired. And obviously growing up in Cincinnati, that was probably a key for you to wanting to probably write that book, I'm sure, was, your understanding of what Pete Rose was, not just only in Cincinnati, but, over the whole, United States and the world is, that. So I'm sure that had an inspiration for trying to write this book too, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important, Dan. Even in Cincinnati, I would say, I think most people have forgotten who Pete Rose really was. In part because of all the all of the events that have unfolded in the past 35 years. And the fact is, in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, for 30 seasons of professional baseball, 30. Pete Rose was an American icon. And we all know his accolades. The Big Red Machine World Series titles and the MVP in 1973, the batting titles, the World Series he brings to Philadelphia, which was also significant. That was Philadelphia's first ever World Series title. And then of course the all-time hit record in 1985. We all know those things, but people loved him not because of the hits or the wins or the awards. They loved him because of how he played. And so, one of the things I wanted to do was go back and recapture that. Because again, it's so easy today to take a hot take and a quick opinion make insulting comments about Pete Rose. At times, Pete Rose has earned those insulting comments, and my book, is both the good and the bad.
Yeah.
However, the only reason why we still care about Pete Rose, and the only reason why we ever really cared about his fall in 1989, is because we loved the rise. We loved all of that.
Right.
And again, you're right. It wasn't just in Cincinnati. He was an American icon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Blue collar guy, Cincinnati, grew up here. I mean, that's just adds all to it. I mean, just the inspiration. How much of that, Keith, do you think? I mean, because in '89, social media wasn't around as far as Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff like that. But how much of that has changed and affected this with him? Because you're so passionate about this, and I appreciate it. But I mean, like, if you were to like dive or dig into a lot of people, say like Babe Ruth, we could probably, unfortunately, like anybody, could find a dark side of issues, that the social media aspect didn't have back then.
Without question. And we don't even have to go back to Babe Ruth, although we certainly could. I mean, let's look at what's happening right now.
Sure.
As recently as a week ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
So a week ago,
Yep.
Shohei Ohtani was the gilded hero of all of baseball, and not just in America. He is the most recognizable, most famous baseball player in the world. And a week ago, we all were celebrating him and appreciating him and already honoring him, and basically putting him into the Hall of Fame. And all of those things, can be right and true. But what is also right and true, as we now know, is that we don't really know these guys.
Right.
We just
Right.
don't. And the bottom line is we don't know what we don't know about them.
Right.
And that is certainly true about players that played 50, 100 years ago, but it's even true right now. I mean, in the 1970s, reporters had intimate access to the players they covered. The clubhouse was often wide open. Reporters came and went. You could sit at someone's locker and talk to them without, being shepherded around by a publicist or
Right.
a press official for the team. Today, reporters often only get access to these players at a table in a post-game press conference in front of 12 or 30 other people. They all live now behind a wall of publicists and lawyers and representatives. And so we don't know these guys very well. We don't know what we don't know. And so, for that reason, again, and I think it's, the example is writ large again with Shohei Ohtani. I truly believe that the only way to properly measure a player's worth, say for the Hall of Fame, is based on what he did on the field. Again, in my book, Charlie Hustle, I'm not making a case for or against Pete Rose. I really don't even cover the Hall of Fame stuff very much because I'm trying to capture the rise and the fall, and everything else after 1989 is sort of wreckage. And there's a lot of wreckage, and that is the sort of the last fifth of the book. But it's not like I'm making a case for or against Pete Rose here, or really delving into the Hall of Fame stuff. However, in a blanket way, I believe that, Pete Rose and baseball's other ne'er-do-wells, and there are lots of them, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Alex Rodriguez, and so on. Yeah. I believe that we should put them in the Hall of Fame based on what they did on the field. If that was enough, I don't have a vote. I don't have a say-so. But if it was enough, I think they should be put into the Hall of Fame. And then if their mistakes are egregious enough, if their crimes are terrible enough, let's put it on the plaque. Let's put it in bronze right there on the plaque, for perpetuity.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I like what you've said, and I've seen on previous podcasts that you've been on, and I think it's important, just the way society is today, is what you said was very important. You gave the good, the bad, and let people make the decisions for themselves. And I think that's important nowadays, because I think the first thing people want to do is pile on and go right to the negative. And I think it's important what you're doing here about Pete Rose, because obviously a lot of Cincinnati people are one-sided. It's Pete Rose, all or nothing, and they don't really know, or they don't want to really understand the bad part of it. They just want to understand. And so I think it's great that you're doing that for people and let them make their own decision based on what information you've provided.
Well, like I said, no one would care about his fall if we didn't care about the rise.
Right.
So
Yeah.
from a pure narrative standpoint, and now I'm just talking about as a writer, you know, in my opinion, my job was to sort of bring him to the mountaintop, because he does get there. Again,
Right.
whether you like him or not, Pete Rose does get to the mountaintop.
Yep.
Right.
And when he's there, he has a view of the entire kingdom of baseball.
Yeah.
But he's not going to stay there. He's going to tumble and fall, you know, often by his own decisions and his own choices.
Yeah.
And so, you know, all I try to do with this narrative is bring him to the top, and then, you know, we watch him fall, and then we sort through the wreckage, and we are still sorting through the wreckage today. We really
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I have to say, you know, one thing that I had forgotten, and I think many baseball fans have forgotten, and even many Cincinnatians have forgotten, that when Pete Rose was banned in 1989, a banishment that he accepted, by the way, he signed
Yeah.
that document.
Yeah.
He was still eligible for the Hall of Fame. There was no rule that prevented him from being put on the ballot. He fully believed on the day that he signed that document in late August 1989 that 2 years later, in 1991, his name would appear on the ballot 5 years after his last at bat as a Cincinnati Red, and he fully believed he'd be elected. And you know, it was only in early 1991, 10 months before his name would have appeared on the ballot, that Cooperstown and the National Baseball Hall of Fame, the board there, changed the rules and ruled that, you know, only eligible players were eligible for the Hall of Fame. It was
Right.
essentially the Pete Rose corollary, and the press knew it. And I have to say that the baseball writers in 1991 were livid, not because they, you know, were in lockstep and were going to automatically vote for Pete. I don't know what would have happened. I don't think anybody would have. Knows it would have been a very interesting vote in 1991, but they were livid because they didn't get the chance. They didn't get the chance to vote.
Right.
Right.
And you know, interestingly, at that time in February 1991, when this rule came down, Sparky Anderson, the former manager of the Reds and a longtime defender of Pete Rose, was critical of the new rule. And what he said was this, and I'm paraphrasing here. You know, Sparky said, you know, this, you know, was a mistake that the Hall of Fame had made this rule, that they had taken the vote away essentially from the people. They had taken the vote away from the writers, and in doing so, Sparky said, it would cast a cloud over baseball that would linger forever. And, you know, Sparky was wrong about a lot of things. You know, Sparky did defend and protect Pete, you know, in the 1970s, when he was, based on my reporting, already engaging in poor behavior off the field. But he was right on this one, Sparky was, because 35 years later, that cloud is still hanging over the game, and that's why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, and we're obviously never know, but this is almost plays out like a drama, like a movie, and especially when you add the unfortunate death of Paul Giamatti,
Bart Giamatti, yeah,
or
Bart.
Bart Giamatti, who was the commissioner at the time, and I mean, you know, who's to say what would happen, you know, and I mean, it's just crazy how it all plays out, and then you fast forward, here we are 35 years later or whatever, you know, and we're still debating all this. Yeah.
So true.
So I have a question. So when did you start this book about Pete, and how like when you got into it with the knowledge you already knew going into it, I mean, were you like surprised, excited about, you know, some of the stuff that you were, you know, learning about it, but how long did this book take you to write?
I began my first interviews in the summer of 2021, so quite a while ago.
Okay.
So about 2.5 years ago, I began my research, began my first interviews. I got access to Pete Rose starting in late September 2021. had that access for a few months, and then didn't. But continued to do reporting. And I, in addition to those interviews with Pete Rose, I conducted over 160 hours of interviews with former players, the men in Rose's inner circle, three different men who placed his bets on baseball, John Dowd, the special counsel of baseball, and John Dowd's entire team of investigators, former FBI agents, and the former deputy of commissioner of baseball under Bart Giamatti, who would succeed him as commissioner, Fay Vincent. So I did a ton of reporting and really tried to drill down on some of the key moments, in Pete's rise and fall. For example, like we all as Cincinnatians remember or know the story of the 1970 All-Star game and the collision at home plate between Rose and catcher Ray Fosse. Unfortunately, Ray Fosse became sick in the summer of 2021, just as I was starting my research, and he sadly died shortly thereafter. So I was unable to interview Ray, but I did interview as many other people as I could about that moment. Players on both rosters that night, the National League and the American League, as well as the entire dinner party that had gathered the night before.
Wow.
As some people know, and as you may know, Ray Fosse and his young wife, Carol Fosse, had dinner the night before that All-Star game out on the West Side with Pete Rose and Carolyn Rose. And the reason why that all happened was a pitcher named Sam McDowell, Sudden Sam McDowell. He was a fastball pitcher for the Cleveland Indians. And, Rose and McDowell had sort of struck up a friendship in the late 1960s. McDowell was always on the All-Star team in those years. Pete was too. And, it's funny that those two hit it off because, Pete famously, did not like pitchers and he did not like the American League. But Sudden Sam was like a good time guy. He was like baseball's party guy, and a good looking guy and sort of a fun guy to go out with on the road. And so, the night before the All-Star game in Cincinnati, Riverfront Stadium, July 14th, 1970, Pete, approaches Sudden Sam and says, "Hey, let's get dinner tonight. Let's, bring your wife out. We'll go get dinner." And Sam said he'd love to, but he had already made plans with his kid catcher, this second year catcher for the Indians, Ray Fosse. And so that's how this party of six gathers the night before. And I interviewed, not just Pete about it, but Carolyn Rose, Carol Fosse, and Sudden Sam McDowell to try to piece together this night, which in and of itself, Steve, is just like a human drama. I mean, right? Like
that's it.
Carolyn Rose told me that she was, of course, at the stadium that night when Pete plowed into Ray to end the game in the 12th inning. And Carolyn said that her first thought as she saw her husband hit Ray and Ray's just, down in the dirt and clearly injured, clearly in pain, was, oh, why did he hurt that poor man we went to dinner with last night?
That's crazy. Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, let's turn your book into a movie.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, so one thing I want to ask about, because it's hard. I would imagine, was it hard for you to get all these people to talk, and were there some that were willing not to talk? And how? I mean, so when I know obviously when you base your book, you kind of got an idea of how you're going to piece it together and everything. And I'm just curious that. Was there something when you were writing the book like, oh man, I have to get this person, or oh, I have to think I need to include this to really paint the picture? Was it hard to get some of these interviews for you?
Certainly, and there were people who opted not to speak. Probably most significantly, Johnny Bench,
I knew you were going to say
would not be interviewed for this book. I
that.
don't know why. I never got a direct answer on that. But through back channels, I've been told by people who are close with Johnny, who are good friends with him from his days in Cincinnati, that Johnny's done talking about Pete Rose.
Right.
So there were some people who declined to speak, and certainly it was difficult to get access even to some of the people who did speak. I mean, baseball is, at the end of the day, a very sort of tight subculture and a fraternity of sorts.
Right.
And I had, I'm not a baseball writer. I haven't spent the last 30 years covering baseball. I do lots of different kinds of stories. So I did have to work to get access. But I think most people that I spoke to, appreciated my approach. That we're going to talk about the good things, the glory moments, because there were glory moments. But we have to talk about the dark days too. Again, because we only care about his fall because we cared about his rise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to what you had mentioned earlier, talking about, and this goes across the board for all Hall of Fames, about, can you separate the stats and the player on the field versus off the field? And we'll look at what you already mentioned about Ohtani, and everything. I mean, how moving forward, not just baseball, but football, all the sports. How are they going to be able to distinct between the two without, like you said, unless they're going to put an asterisk on there about their personal life?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that,
Yeah.
because so much has changed. Speaking strictly about the Baseball Hall of Fame for a moment, when that was built and conceived in the 1930s, and for decades afterwards, it was a relatively small deal. It was a tourist attraction. That's why it was built. And the crowds that came to induction ceremonies were rather small. They held them right there, like on the steps of the Hall of Fame on in downtown Cooperstown, or in a courtyard right next to it. The players gave no speeches. When they did start to give speeches, they were rather short. In 1966, Ted Williams is elected to the Hall of Fame, as everybody knows, one of our objectively top, 5 great ball players of all time. Ted Williams gives a speech that lasts for 6 minutes, that he wrote the night before in his hotel room in Cooperstown.
Wow.
Today, if you've been to Cooperstown on induction weekend, the crowds can exceed 100,000 people or more. The players give speeches that last for 35 minutes, that are carried live on national television, speeches that are just praising themselves, essentially. And then we parade them down the streets of Cooperstown as if they're minor gods. Right. And, if we're going to treat our athletic icons, whether it's in baseball or basketball or football, like they are minor gods, and that is the qualification to make it into our athletic halls of fame, then I would submit that our halls of fame are going to be pretty empty.
Yep. No, I totally agree with you that, and one thing that I was sitting there thinking about too during all this, the previous question I asked you is, were you surprised at any information that you gathered that you didn't know about Pete, that you found out during this investigation?
Absolutely. There are, new revelations in this book that have never been written about before, or never been written about at any length. For starters, let me just say, Pete has struggled over the past 35 years to say he was addicted or not addicted, and he seems to contradict himself at times about that. Even now, based on my reporting, without question, based on interviews with people who were with him, gambling with him in the 1970s and 80s, there is no question in my mind that Pete suffered from a gambling addiction. He of course is called out in February 1989 for rumors that he's bet on baseball and bet on the Reds. He is called to New York for a secret meeting with Bart Giamatti and Fay Vincent and the outgoing commissioner, Peter Uberoff. And again, at this meeting, Pete lies when they ask him, is it true what we've heard? Is it true that you're betting on baseball? And, he's received a lot of criticism for that over the years, deservedly so, in part because he continues to lie about it, as we all know, for 15 more years.
Right.
That said, based on peer-reviewed scientific articles and journals and research about addiction, specifically gambling addiction, the two barriers to being honest about your addiction are shame and indebtedness. Shame and indebtedness. And I can tell you again, based on my reporting, Pete was in debt to bookies in 1989. And I do believe that he felt shame about what was happening. Another revelation about that meeting is, if Pete's honest that day, based on my reporting, the punishment may have been completely different. I'm not going to sit here and say that he would have, gotten a slap on the wrist and returned to the Reds, by opening day 1989. I do believe there would have been a punishment. But if Pete comes forward in February 1989 or the spring of 1989, as John Dowd and his investigators finally build a dossier that, has all of these details about his gambling, Pete's punishment is going to be different. Because the other thing we've forgotten in the last 35 years is that, just like the Shohei Ohtani scandal at this particular moment is bad for baseball, Pete Rose's scandal in 1989 was bad for baseball. They did not want to tar and feather him and leave him in Fountain Square. They would have done everything they could to help him. And of course we know that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's crazy. I know that we got limited time here, so I just want to kind of ask another couple questions real quick. And I know one of them was, it's amazing we're talking about Shohei Ohtani right now. The timing with your book coming out and opening day, it's pretty amazing on that side that's coming out, and just to go along with what you got coming up here. So let everybody out there know. I know that you'll be coming to Cincinnati here, I believe, on April the 2nd at Joseph Beth Book, and then also I think the next day and the 3rd at Rapid Run, and as part of the Delhi Historic Society. So talk a little bit about what people can learn about you, get your book, just give them all your social media stuff so people can reach out to you.
Awesome. Yeah, sure. So the book, Charlie Hustle, The Rise and Fall of Pete Rose and the Last Glory Days of Baseball, is out right now. You can purchase that anywhere you buy books. But as you said, I'm going to be at Joseph Beth Booksellers on Tuesday, April 2nd. And the following night, I'll be doing another presentation in conjunction with the Delhi Historical Society that will be held at the Rapid Run Middle School Auditorium. Joseph Beth will be there selling books that night. And, you can find me in all the usual places. I'm on Twitter, and I still call it Twitter, at Keith OB. And you can follow me on Instagram at O'Brien's Story.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know I looked at your schedule, and I'm telling you what, you are just maxed out with your appearances and what you got. I know you start this week, and then I think you go all the way up until June. It looks like that I saw that you're going. So it's I know you're super, super busy. This has been awesome to get with you. And again, I apologize for the McNicholas High School thing. I should have did a better job of my reporting and trying to figure that out. But
That's all right, Dan.
yeah, but no, it was great and very interesting. I can't wait to myself. Actually, I'm going to try to get to you at one of either Rookwood, which is down the street, obviously from us, and maybe get to meet you in person and be there for that because I really want to
Yes.
get that book. Maybe Steve can go with me, but
Yep.
it's a really exciting time and we appreciate it. And I know you've been swamped, and we were trying to work this out. So thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, of course. It was my pleasure to talk to you guys. Always good to talk to Cincinnatians who care about baseball and the Reds. Always.
Yep, I
Well,
appreciate. Go ahead, Steve. I'm
I
sorry.
was just gonna say congratulations. I mean that's great. I wish you all the success and I mean it. They should turn your book into a movie.
Well, Keith, if they do that, just if they do get the movie and you get the rights and going on, just include me and Steve as an extra or something, or in the
You
crowd.
got it. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll put you in the stands. We'll put you in the stands.
that'll be
Dan's
good.
gonna be Tommy Giosa.
That'll be good. So, Keith, we really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get we're going to get this out so everybody gets to see this actually because opening day is coming up this week. I think it's on Thursday,
Yep.
so it's perfect. So again, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. So for Dan Albert, Steve Ellis, and Keith O'Brien, you've been watching This Week in Anderson. Well, guys, catch you guys next week.